Target's mass exodus from California represents the largest single state retail contraction in the company's history, and it didn't happen overnight. This is the culmination of a 2 year policy disaster that turned one of America's largest retail chains into a case study of how government dysfunction can systematically destroy an entire industry. 47 stores are closing across California over an 18-month period, eliminating 6,200 jobs directly and an estimated 12,000 indirect jobs through suppliers, contractors, and service workers. 23 communities will lose their only Target within a 15-mile radius. But these numbers only tell part of the story. The real narrative is found in the chain of policy decisions that made operating brick and mortar retail in California financially impossible. The collapse began in January 2023 when California's new retail theft enforcement standards took effect. On paper, the law was supposed to streamline prosecution for organized retail crime. In practice, it raised the felony threshold to $950 and created a multi-step review process, requiring video evidence, loss prevention documentation, and coordinated law enforcement response. The translation is simple. Unless a theft crosses into four figures and you have it captured on multiple camera angles with time-stamped inventory logs, it gets processed as a misdemeanor if it gets processed at all. This wasn't a minor policy adjustment. It was an invitation to criminals that theft below $950 carries virtually no consequences. No. Within 30 days of implementation, Target stores across the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Sacramento began logging theft incidents in the double digits per week. Not per month, per week. Organized groups discovered they could walk into stores during peak hours, fill shopping carts with electronics, cosmetics, and over-the-counter medications, and walk straight out while staff members stood by under strict orders from corporate legal counsel not to intervene. Store managers found themselves in an impossible position, watching their inventory disappear in real time while company policy and potential liability exposure prevented any physical intervention. The only option was to document the theft and file reports after the fact. By March 2023, Target's internal loss reports showed inventory shrinkage rates in California stores running 3 to 4 times the national average. In some urban locations, shrinkage hit 12%. For a business operating on net profit margins of 3 to 4%, this isn't a profit problem requiring minor adjustments. This is an extinction-level event that makes continuing operations mathematically impossible. When you're losing inventory at 3 times your profit margin, every day you stay open increases your total losses. In April 2023, Target closed 3 stores in the Bay Area: San Francisco's Folsom Street location, Oakland's Broadway Plaza, and a Daly City site. The company released a careful statement about underperformance and safety concerns. Local officials responded with outrage, accusing Target of abandoning communities and failing to invest in solutions. But what nobody mentioned publicly was that those 3 stores employed a combined 260 people, and the closure notices were filed exactly 93 days earlier, the minimum required under California's WARN Act. That timing reveals something crucial. The decision wasn't impulsive or reactive. It was calculated, data-driven, and based on months of internal analysis showing these locations had become unsalvageable. Simultaneously, Target's insurance premiums for California locations spiked dramatically. Property and liability coverage that cost the company $400,000 annually per store in 2022 jumped to $670,000 in 2023. This wasn't arbitrary price gouging. Insurance underwriters reprice risk based on actuarial claims data, and that data showed California stores generating dramatically higher claims for broken windows, theft-related vandalism, employee injuries tied to confrontations, and customer incidents. The risk profile changed fundamentally, so the pricing changed accordingly. For Target, this represented an additional $270,000 per store in annual fixed costs that couldn't be offset through sales increases or operational efficiency. In June 2023, a coalition of California retailers, including Target, Walgreens, CVS, Home Depot, and Safeway, filed a joint letter with the governor's office requesting an emergency meeting to discuss retail crime enforcement, insurance cost relief, and regulatory flexibility on security staffing. The letter was professionally worded but direct in its warning. Without immediate intervention, more closures were coming. The meeting happened and lasted exactly 40 minutes. According to two sources present in the room, the governor's staff offered sympathy, promised to form a task force, and suggested retailers invest more in private security while the state worked on long term solutions. No immediate policy changes were offered, no enforcement surge was promised, no insurance relief was discussed. Just assurances that the administration was taking the situation seriously and would get back to them. By August 2023, Walgreens announced closure of 9 additional California stores, bringing its 2-year total to 24 closures. CVS followed with 7 more. Both companies cited identical factors: theft, operating costs, and staffing challenges. But the domino effect most people miss is that when major pharmacy chains close, it's not just about shopping convenience. It's about access to prescription medications, vaccines, and basic healthcare services for neighborhoods that often lack alternatives. In parts of Oakland and Los Angeles, residents now face 4-mile drives or hour-long bus commutes to reach the nearest pharmacy. This transforms a business story into a public health crisis, particularly for elderly residents, people with disabilities, and low-income families without reliable transportation. While this retail collapse accelerated, California's minimum wage for large retail chains increased to $16 per hour, with an automatic escalation clause tied to inflation. For a store employing 80 people running 2 shifts, that represents an additional $320,000 per year in labor costs. Add that to the theft losses averaging hundreds of thousands per location. Add the insurance premium spike of $270,000 per store. Add property taxes that haven't decreased even as foot traffic and sales collapse. The margins don't just shrink, they completely invert. Stores begin losing money on every dollar of sales. Target's October 2023 quarterly earnings call included a footnote that most analysts glossed over, but that reveals the full scope of California's problem. The company reported spending $800 million annually on theft prevention nationwide, and California alone accounted for nearly 30% of that expenditure, despite representing only 11% of Target's store footprint. One state was consuming almost 1/3 of the entire company's national security budget. That's not a sustainable business model under any circumstances. The regulatory environment makes the situation even more absurd. California law limits the number of security personnel a retailer can employ without triggering additional workplace safety and training requirements. If you hire more than 3 dedicated loss prevention staff per location, you must provide them with the same certification and oversight as licensed security guards. This means background checks, state registration, continuing education, and liability insurance. The cost per security guard jumps from $40,000 annually to $67,000. So companies face an impossible choice: either understaff security and accept massive theft losses, or properly staff security and blow through your budget trying to stay compliant with regulations. The state created conditions making theft rampant, then made it prohibitively expensive to prevent that theft, then expressed shock when businesses decided the game wasn't worth playing anymore. By December 2023, Target began an internal strategic review of its entire California footprint. This wasn't public information. This happened in boardrooms in Minneapolis, where executives ran scenario models projecting what happens if theft rates stay flat, what happens if they worsen, what happens if insurance premiums continue climbing, and what the break-even point looks like. The models returned brutal conclusions. If current trends continued, California stores would collectively lose money by mid-2024. Not individual problem locations, but the entire state operation. In February 2024, the governor's office released a new public safety initiative focused on organized retail crime. The announcement sounded promising, with enhanced coordination between local and state law enforcement, dedicated prosecution units, and $50 million in funding for regional task forces. But examining the details reveals the initiative as purely performative. The $50 million was split across 15 counties, meaning roughly $3.3 million per county. The task forces wouldn't become fully operational until late 2024, a year away. The prosecution units consisted of reassigned attorneys, not new hires, meaning no actual increase in capacity. It was a press release disguised as a plan, and retailers immediately recognized it as such. Within days of the announcement, a coalition representing 73 California-based retail chains released a statement remarkable for its bluntness in corporate communication. We appreciate the administration's attention to this issue, but without immediate enforcement and measurable accountability, we are forced to make decisions based on current conditions, not future promises. That carefully worded statement was a warning shot. Retailers were publicly announcing they would not wait for government to fix problems they showed no capacity to solve. Target closed 5 more California stores in April 2024, then 6 more in May. By July, the count reached 19 closures since the beginning of 2023. Each closure followed an identical pattern: a WARN Act notice. 90 days out, a brief statement citing performance and safety concerns, and local officials demanding answers while proposing no actual solutions. But what wasn't making headlines is that for every store that closed, 3 or 4 more were placed on performance watch. Corporate terminology for "we're deciding whether to pull the plug." Store managers were being asked to submit weekly justification reports explaining why their locations should remain open. This isn't normal operational oversight. This is triage. In August 2024, a Target distribution center in Fresno that services 72 stores across Central California and employs 430 people announced a workforce optimization plan. The corporate euphemism translates to cutting shifts, reducing inventory throughput, and preparing for the possibility of significantly reduced capacity needs. The Fresno Center functions as a logistics hub, meaning its scale down doesn't just affect Target, it impacts the entire regional supply chain ecosystem, including trucking companies, warehouse staffing agencies, and packaging suppliers. First domino falls. September 2024 brought a development that accelerated the crisis dramatically. Insurance giant Chubb, one of the largest commercial property insurers in the United States, sent a memo to retail clients in California stating it would not renew policies for locations that filed more than 3 theft-related claims in a 12-month period. Other major insurers quickly followed suit. Within weeks, dozens of stores across multiple retail chains faced policy non-renewals with only 30 to 60 days notice. This created a nightmare scenario because operating without insurance isn't optional. Lenders require it. Corporate risk management departments require it. No coverage means no legal ability to operate. Second domino falls. Some retailers attempted to find coverage through surplus lines insurers, the high-risk market where premiums run double or triple standard rates. But even that market has capacity limits. By October, insurance brokers were telling retail clients that California retail was becoming uninsurable at scale. The market was withdrawing entirely from certain risk categories. In November 2024, Target's executive team made the final decision. They would exit California on a massive scale, keeping only a handful of high-performing suburban stores in affluent areas where theft remained manageable and demographics supported premium pricing. But the urban core, the mid-tier markets, and any locations requiring heavy security investment while still losing money would close. The plan called for closing 47 stores across California over 18 months, the largest single-state retail contraction in company history. Because of WARN Act requirements, closure notices began filing in early December. The notices became public in January 2025. Local media started reporting individual closures, but coverage remained fragmented with no one connecting the full scope of what was happening. In February 2025, Target's CEO gave an interview to a national outlet and responded to a question about California exits with a statement that detonated across social media. "We can't run stores where the cost of doing business exceeds the revenue we can generate. California has become that place." The statement was polite and corporate in tone, but devastating in its implications. Within 6 hours, the governor's office issued a response calling the statement misleading and not reflective of California's business environment. They cited job growth numbers, GDP statistics, and tech sector investment as evidence of California's economic health. But notably, they didn't address theft. They didn't address insurance costs. They didn't address any of the actual operational issues Target cited. The response was pure deflection. In March 2025, the full closure list leaked. 47 stores, 6,200 jobs eliminated, 23 communities losing their only Target within a 15-mile radius. The reaction was seismic. City councils began holding emergency sessions. Workers organized protests outside the governor's office. Local businesses near closing Target locations braced for impact because when an anchor retailer leaves a shopping center, foot traffic collapses, and smaller shops, depending on spillover customers, begin failing. Third domino falls. The governor held a press conference in April 2025, visibly frustrated not at the situation, but at the narrative developing around it. He accused Target of making a politically motivated decision, suggested the company was exaggerating the theft problem for political gain, and announced a new plan to incentivize retail investment through tax credits. But tax credits don't stop theft. They don't lower insurance premiums. They don't reduce regulatory burdens. And most importantly, they don't apply to businesses that are already leaving. This was a band-aid for a compound fracture. The business community immediately recognized it as such, and within 72 hours, 3 other national retail chains quietly began their own California strategic reviews. A lawsuit filed in May 2025 kept the story alive in news cycles. A coalition of workers from closed Target stores sued both the company and the state, arguing Target violated its duty to provide safe working environments and that California failed to enforce laws that would have prevented the conditions leading to closures. The legal merits were questionable, but the lawsuit forced depositions and discovery, bringing internal documents into the public record. That's when the situation became truly damning for state officials. Discovery revealed that Target had requested in writing, multiple times, enhanced law enforcement presence at specific high theft locations. In several cases, local police departments acknowledged the requests, but stated they lacked staffing to provide dedicated patrols. In other cases, district attorneys' offices declined to prosecute cases that met the legal threshold because they prioritized violent crime over property crime. Everything Target claimed publicly was now backed by internal correspondence and government emails. The narrative shifted dramatically. This wasn't a corporation abandoning communities. This was a corporation that tried to stay, repeatedly asked for help, didn't receive it, and finally made the only rational decision remaining. By June 2025, economic impact reports began quantifying the damage. The Institute for Applied Economics estimated the Target closures would result in 12,000 indirect job losses through suppliers, contractors, service workers, and transportation companies. Municipal governments in affected areas projected a combined $73 million in lost sales tax revenue over 3 years. Property values near closed stores dropped an average of 8% within 90 days of closure announcements. But these numbers, devastating as they are, represent only the first wave of a cascading economic crisis. The crucial point that should terrify every California resident, whether they shop at Target or not, is that this isn't about one company. Target is the canary in the coal mine. The same mathematics that broke Target's business model are running in the background at Walmart, Home Depot, and every major retail chain operating in California. If they begin following the same playbook of phased withdrawals, market exits, and distribution center downsizing, California isn't looking at a retail problem. It's facing an infrastructure collapse that will fundamentally transform how millions of people access basic goods and services. Consider a mid-sized California city of 200,000 people. It currently has 2 Target stores, 1 Walmart, 3 grocery chains, a Home Depot, and a Lowe's. Now project 24 months forward, where the Target stores close, Walmart reduces hours and cuts staff, 1 grocery chain shuts 2 locations, and Home Depot consolidates to a single regional hub 30 miles away. What happens to that community? Prices increase because competition disappears. Selection shrinks because remaining stores carry less inventory to reduce theft exposure. Drive times increase because people must travel farther for basic shopping. Lower-income families get hit hardest because they cannot absorb extra transportation costs or higher prices. Small businesses suffer because foot traffic disappears from shopping districts. Property tax revenue declines because commercial real estate values crater. The city cuts services to balance budgets. Schools lose funding. Public safety gets stretched even thinner. It becomes a death spiral where each negative development accelerates the next. Let me tell you about Maria Gonzalez, who worked at the Target in East Oakland for 9 years. She started as a cashier, worked her way up to department lead, and was 3 months away from becoming an assistant manager. She has 2 children, ages 7 and 10. Her husband works construction. Their combined income was $68,000 annually. Not wealthy, but stable and sufficient for their needs. When the closure notice came down, Maria had 90 days to find new employment. She applied to 11 positions, received 3 interviews, and got 1 offer. Part-time, 15 hours weekly, no benefits. She now works two part-time jobs, drives 40 minutes each way to the nearest Target still operating, and her husband handles school runs because her schedule is completely fractured. She told a local reporter, "They say the store closed because of theft. I watch the theft happen every single day. We'd call the police, they'd show up 2 hours later, take a report, and leave. We begged for security. We begged for help. Nobody came. And now we're the ones paying the price. Multiply Maria by 6,200 direct job losses, then by 12,000 indirect losses. That's the human cost of policy failure." Here's what the governor's office doesn't want anyone to understand. This collapse was predictable, it was predicted, and it was preventable. In 2022, a report from the California Retailers Association, representing 8,000 businesses, laid out exactly what would happen if organized retail theft wasn't addressed, if insurance costs weren't stabilized, and if regulatory burdens weren't eased. The report included a specific timeline projecting store closures starting in 2023, accelerating through 2024, and reaching crisis levels by 2025. That report was delivered to the governor's office, the state legislature, and every major municipal government in California. It didn't predict the future through some mystical insight. It warned about inevitable consequences of current policies, and those warnings were systematically ignored. Why were they ignored? Because addressing these issues would have required politically uncomfortable decisions. It would have meant admitting that criminal justice reforms had severe unintended consequences. It would have meant revisiting labor regulations popular with union constituencies. It would have meant confronting the reality that California's cost structure had become fundamentally unsustainable for entire categories of business. So instead, state leadership did nothing and hoped the problem would resolve itself or that they could successfully blame corporations when it didn't. But economic gravity doesn't care about political messaging or blame assignment. When the mathematics of business stops working, companies leave. Not because they're greedy or heartless, but because survival requires revenue exceeding costs. In California, for a growing number of industries, that equation no longer balances. The chain of causation is clear and documented. California implements policies making retail theft harder to prosecute. Theft rates explode. Stores lose inventory at unsustainable rates. Insurance companies reprice risk and premiums double. Retailers request help, and the state offers task forces that won't be operational for months. Meanwhile, labor costs increase, regulatory burdens grow, and profit margins vanish. Retailers close stores, workers lose jobs, communities lose services, tax revenues collapse. The state blames companies. Companies release documentary evidence showing they requested help repeatedly. The cycle continues because underlying policies remain unchanged. What happens next if nothing changes? The remaining major retailers run the same analytical models Target ran. They reach the same conclusions. Over the next 12 to 18 months, you'll see a second wave of exits larger, faster, and more devastating than the first. When that happens, the economic damage won't be reversible through tax credits or task forces. It will require a complete economic rebuild of retail infrastructure, and rebuilds take decades, not years. The California retail collapse isn't a future risk that might materialize under certain conditions. It's happening right now in real time. The Target exit is simply the most visible crack in a foundation that's been crumbling for 2 years. The people in charge are still pretending the building is structurally sound while residents can feel it swaying beneath their feet. If you've witnessed major retailers closing or cutting hours in your area, document it and share that information. Contact your city council members and demand they answer specific questions. What is the current retail theft rate in your district? How many police reports for retail theft were filed last year and how many resulted in prosecution? What is the city doing to retain major employers and anchor retailers? Demand actual answers with data, not promises and press releases. If you're a California resident, contact your state legislators and ask them directly, will you support immediate reforms to retail theft prosecution thresholds? Will you support regulatory relief for retailers trying to hire adequate security? Will you support insurance market reforms to make coverage available and affordable? Their answers or their silence will tell you everything you need to know about whether they're serious about solving this crisis. Share this information with everyone you know because this story is being actively suppressed by outlets that don't want to ask uncomfortable questions or challenge the official narrative. The data is clear, the pattern is undeniable, and the consequences are accelerating. Your voice and your vote are the only tools that can force accountability and change before the second wave of closures makes the current situation look mild by comparison.